The Minnesota Timberwolves are going to win the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. Maybe. I've had a really hard time figuring out this trade. That's why it's been really hard for me to get this video put together. I've gone from this makes perfect sense for both teams to did both of these teams actually just get worse to no, I think maybe the Knicks won. No, I'm pretty sure that the Timberwolves might have actually won this thing. And I think that's where I'm landing because I think that this trade answers more questions for the Wolves than it creates. And I'm not sure that I can say the same thing for the Knicks. So let's start with the Timberwolves. This is a talent upgrade for their roster. Not because Julius Randle is like so much better than Cat or anything like that, but because they are actually pretty close and they also got Donte DiVincenzo. And that's important because they don't actually have a ton of shooting on the roster. Cat was a really big deal for their spacing, and it was always going to be a challenge for them that their two best shooters were both bigs. Cat and Naz Reid. Donte DiVincenzo gives them some balance of where their shooting can come from and really helps the backcourt in that department. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert fit and how you can't play them together. And I don't think it's really that cut and dry, nor is it going to be that bad. Like, Julius Randle's not a center who has to play power forward because Rudy Gobert's on the roster. Like Cat was. You know, I looked for lineups that the Knicks played last year with Randle at the 5, and I found exactly 0. Now, I'm not going to call that definitive, scientific research just because I couldn't find any of those lineups when I was going through their 5 lineup data. Doesn't mean that there wasn't a single minute across the course of the season when Randle was healthy that he played the 5, but he was at least paired with a traditional center like all the time last year in New York. And when I say traditional, I mean none of those guys in New York were stretching the floor, like none of them. So it's not that different going from them to Rudy Gobert, except, he's just a better player. And while Randle doesn't stretch the floor himself like Karl-Anthony Towns does, he will still create some space because he's a capable scorer at 3 levels of the floor. He's not a laser from 3, but he was about league average during his time in New York, 34% on nearly 6 attempts a night. And what's maybe more important is that he was shooting like 38 from the corner. And that's where the Wolves can take advantage of some of that space at his position. Not to mention, the defense is going to have to account for his abilities off the dribble in ways that they didn't have to with Cat. I'm not making the argument that Randle is better than Cat on offense, but they are different in the way that they played, and I think that the way that Randle plays does create space in its own way. Not to mention, he's on an every other year trend of improved shooting from 3, and we're due for an up year. Yeah, that part's a joke. But he shoots 50% inside the arc, which aligns with his effective field goal percentage. It's not like he's Mr. Inefficient. He is a threat off the dribble, like I mentioned, and he gets to the free throw line and makes them. He's a strong rebounder, and the dude's a bucket. Plus, he's a decent enough playmaker for others. Again, you're not going to say he's a better offensive player than Cat, but he's not a huge downgrade, and I don't think he's going to just ruin what the Timberwolves were on offense, which was a lot of times, hey, Ant, go be great anyway. On top of that, the Timberwolves have the defensive infrastructure to account for his weaknesses on that side of the ball, just like they were making up for the weaknesses of Cat. When they put Cat and Gobert together in the first place, most people thought it didn't make a lot of sense. It's the modern NBA. Why would you want to play 2 centers? And they schemed that to work. They should be able to scheme something to work with Julius Randle, who's more of a true power forward. At the end of the day, it's going to look different, but I think it could come out as kind of a wash between Randle and Cat, or at least close enough. And that's before you account for the Donte DiVincenzo piece, which is where I really think they won. He's a guy who's been a 40% three-point shooter in last year on almost 9 attempts a game. That's a legit floor spacer in the backcourt that the Wolves desperately need. Here's a list of guys on the Timberwolves roster that shot more than 8 threes a game. And here's a list of guys on the Timberwolves roster who shot more than 7 threes a game. I'm gonna end the bit, but the point is, this team had to rely on Nickeil Alexander-Walker to play real minutes in the playoffs as basically the only guard that they trusted, not named Mike Conley or Anthony Edwards. And that's not a knock on Alexander-Walker, it was just not a lot of options. And Donte DiVincenzo is a really good one. He holds up defensively, and he's going to be a huge upgrade to their backcourt. And finally, this could also elevate Naz Reid in a way, who can still fill that stretch big role and can play next to Randle and can play next to Gobert. His role doesn't have to change that much. It's still the third big, but it's a little bit more clear. It's a cleaner fit, and he doesn't have skill redundancy like he does with a guy like Cat. When the Wolves need a big guy that can shoot, they have their guy, and this helps lessen the impact of the loss of Karl-Anthony Towns. So when you add it all together, I think the Wolves actually come out pretty well in this trade, and that's just looking at going into this season on the floor. And we're not even getting into the financial reasons behind this trade and what it could do long-term for how they're building their roster. I think it's a win. Again, they can replace Cat's scoring with Randle. They can replicate his shooting from the big spot with Reid, and they can add shooting to the backcourt with DiVincenzo. They're a better balanced team without leaving like some gaping hole that's shaped like Karl-Anthony Towns. On the Knicks side, it's kind of the opposite. Cat is a big-time talent being added to a team that's full of big-time talent. It's really easy to think, holy crap, that team just stacked itself with great wing depth, has an all-NBA point guard, and now they have one of the best shooting bigs of all time. How incredible. Add to it, they no longer have to worry about fitting Julius Randle into their future in these new look versatile lineups, which I truly think was a problem for the Knicks. That's amazing. And then you dig into it a little bit more, and you wonder why you're not throwing a party. And it's things like when you have to have quotes like, "We squashed our beef" between the player you just traded for and your coach. Not a great sign. It was clear that when Tibbs was in Minnesota, he wasn't a Cat fan, and the feeling was very mutual. And that's why you need the "we squashed it" quote. Beef existed between these two, and now you've added a $55 million player to your roster that your coach has a history of disliking. He also has to go back to playing center, which means he's also your primary rim protector now for a team that's built on defense. That's never went well in his career at all. Now, don't get me wrong. In a vacuum, he is absolutely an upgrade at the center position. They needed an answer at their center position, particularly when Mitchell Robinson got hurt. He's a very talented player, and the offense potential is just outstanding. It's going to be really exciting. They're going to be a top league pass team. And let's not pretend that they weren't already looking at a reality where they were taking a step back defensively, just bringing Julius Randle back into the picture. They were likely going to have to, despite how much Tibbs doth protest, they were going to have to play Randle at the 5 at times. So in a lot of ways, they're just leaning into the path they were kind of already going to have to go down with a guy that they clearly feel like is better and has more potential and high, top end talent at that position. And it doesn't hurt that he's got the CAA and Kentucky connections that align with the Knicks front office. All of that is true, and there's a world where this goes really well offensively. But does it feel like he's going to be a good system fit? I don't know that it does. Does it feel like it's gonna be a good city fit? I don't think it is at all. New York is a tough market, maybe the toughest market that there is. And Cat dealing with pressure from the media is questionable at best. He gives you some interesting quotes when it's not pressure. It's just Cat. How well's that gonna go in New York when there's adversity? Because there will be some. This team's not gonna go 82-0. But will any of that even matter? I think it might. Beyond Cat dealing with criticism and not putting his foot in his mouth, the Knicks coaching staff has kind of a lot of work cut out for them. Brunson is not a good defender. But last year it didn't really matter because everyone else that played when it mattered was. That's not going to be the case now because the anchor of their defense is a negative defender. So they're going to have to scheme up a way for their wings to make up for being weaker at the point of attack and at the rim. And that's really hard to do. I would argue it's impossible to do fully. Now, they've got some guys that you would think would be up for the challenge, assuming they're available. OG Anunoby has played 50 games or less in 3 of the last 4 seasons. Mitchell Robinson, who would be your defensive backup center and even playing next to Cat at times, also has a tendency to miss quite a bit of time and is already hurt missing the beginning of the season. Josh Hart has been more durable lately and will help defensively, but he seems to have forgotten where the 3-point line is, and that's important now because he's going to be playing less small ball 4, presumably, and more 2 guard. And we're about to find out if Miles McBride is the real deal or not, because Dante DiVincenzo was a big part of what made them good last year, and he's gone. I'm not saying that the Knicks are going to suck. Far from it. There's a world where they're just so talented that they can cover up some of the defensive shortcomings by being awesome on offense, but does that sound like Tibbs? I don't know. He's had teams that were good offense and bad defense before. I don't know that those teams did particularly well, but it's happened. I don't know. I could easily talk myself into this, and I'm very intrigued and interested to see what it looks like on the court. But I wouldn't be shocked if they came out of the gate dropping some games that they probably shouldn't, and people start panicking about the Knicks. Because after all, New York sports fans, and particular members of the national media, are incredibly rational and patient people. They have no tendency to overreact. At all. What do you think? Did either team win this trade? Did they both get worse? Did they both get better? Let me know in the comments section down below, and while you're there, hit like on this video so that YouTube knows that it doesn't suck. And please subscribe to the channel so that I know you want me to make more of them. And while I'm busy working my darndest to make them videos, go ahead and watch that one that I already made.